you got a weight problem and you got the cravings and the insatiable thing going on, you might need to quit the addictive foods. And people, so a bright line is just a clear boundary that you just are never going to cross. Like if someone goes into AA for alcohol, they're going to throw up a bright line for alcohol. And a lot of people have assumed historically that you can't use a bright line approach for food because you have to eat to live, but you don't have to eat donuts to live.
Yeah.
And a lot of the foods that we have in our food supply today are completely unnecessary. Cut them out entirely instead of advocating for this approach of moderation. Because like for some of us, the one piece of pizza experiment just doesn't ever go well. And we're actually happier and freer if we just never try it. And we're just like, yeah, pizza's just off the menu. And we grieve that. And I'm not saying that's super easy. I'm just saying it's better than the alternative of like thinking it's going to go okay. And then you've eaten half the pizza or the whole pizza. And then you're dealing with those consequences and living in a body that you can't stand to live in. It's like, which would you rather have? I'd rather not live with pizza in my life at all and get to live in a right-sized body and feel really happy about myself every day. So yeah, that's kind of the general approach.
For sure. Yeah. And it's interesting, that we have that aversion to creating bright lines and being abstinent from, partaking in certain foods. Me personally, in my writings on fat loss, and as you know, I've written a book on that as well. I got a lot of blowback about, talking about eating all whole foods and no processed foods and things like that. And a lot of people really, they push back on that and they say, you're advocating orthorexia and that's very extreme and people can't sustain that. And what about, can I have a cheat day? Can I do it, some of the time? What if I do it 80% of the time? There's so much pushback and there's so many people who see it as so extreme that I have to say, I really took that to heart. And I was like, maybe it is a little too extreme. Maybe it isn't doable for a lot of people. And I softened my stance on that because of that. And what I really admire about you is you haven't done that. You basically said, this is how it is. This is what you have to do. No exceptions, none of the time.
My program based on it. So it's kind of hard to backpedal on it.
And as we were just talking about before we started recording this, there's a lot of data around how people can delude themselves into thinking they're doing things that they're not actually doing, and just really not having a good objective, sort of clarity on what they're actually doing. It's really easy for people to sneak in candy bars pretty regularly and then convince themselves that they're eating a perfect diet, or to exercise once in a while and think that they're exercising 5 days a week really hard. And there's lots of different examples of that. But one of the things that I think makes your method so successful is that really black and white, just you're either doing it or you're not. This is a rule. There are no exceptions. By having that clarity and not letting like more of a voice of moderation seep in, where you're kind of saying, oh, you can do it sometimes and it's okay if you adhere not 80% of the time or whatever. By having that very clear boundary, it allows people to not delude themselves and to really recognize it if they slip up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it does mostly. I mean, that's the idea, is that the bar is set, it's high and it's firm, and you should always kind of know where you're at with respect to the bar. I mean, as you know, because I know that you watched this talk that I gave in New York City when I launched my book, there is actually some data that I have now that hints at, it's not the nail in the coffin, but it hints at the idea that people might still be deluding themselves in bright line eating. So for example, I ask people, we have a survey program, a research program. We've got, I don't know how many, let's say 1,500 people in it now long-term. And some of them are in my Bright Lifers group, which is a paid program that people can partake in after my boot camp. And some of them are not in Bright Lifers, but they all did my boot camp, which is my core program. So then some joined the after program and some didn't. And the people who didn't, with the same level of reported adherence to the bright lines, are losing half as much weight as Bright Lifers.
Yeah.
Even though they report identical adherence to the bright lines. And it's like, well, how is that possible? Like, we're asking them, like, on a regular basis, Did you abstain from sugar? How perfectly? Did you abstain from flour? How perfectly? Did you weigh and measure your food? How perfectly? And they're reporting the exact same levels of adherence, and they're losing half as much weight.
Yeah. So what do you attribute that to?
Delusion. So, I mean, well, we're asking them on a scale from 1 to 4, how perfect was it? 4 being perfect and 1 being, I was eating candy every day. And so I attribute it to the difference between what would they count as a 2 or a 3, right? I think bright lifers are in a community where everybody's really doing it by and large. And I think their standard of what counts as true adherence is a higher standard.
Gotcha. Very interesting.
Yeah. So the non-bright lifers have titrated their scale of allowance down a little. So their 4 is not a bright lifer 4. Their 3 is not a bright lifer 3.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So, first of all, I've seen some really interesting data that in this talk that you shared with me, and it's looking more and more like your methods are going to turn out to, hopefully, if the research trends continue this way, are going to turn out to be basically the most effective dietary approach to weight loss there is, and that's really cool.
So excited! Yeah.
So
like that. Yeah.
I guess a quick mention for anybody who's listening and has, who has taken the food susceptibility quiz, or I guess I should say, go take the food susceptibility quiz, find out if you're ranking highly on that. And then if you are, jump in Susan's program. But I want to shift gears right now from weight loss, because we've talked about your background. We've talked about the whole weight loss thing and the approach to it. And I want to shift gears into energy and fatigue, because I know that there's a ton of people that have both issues. Maybe they have fatigue and they're overweight. And then maybe they go on some weight loss approach and they start to feel a crash in energy. And so there's some kind of interesting interplay between the whole, losing weight and being overweight and energy levels. So can you just talk a little about your observations around that whole kind of interplay between those two things?
And can I throw back at you real quick? Because I have a question, which is like, being overweight makes someone have low energy, doesn't it? I mean, certainly leptin resistance would make you feel sluggish. Are there other reasons why, if you're heavy, you not have very much energy? I mean, it's hard to carry around all that weight. I'm thinking like in simplistic terms though. So
I mean, there's a number of different potential mechanisms. One would be inflammation. I mean, having a large excess of fat on your body actually creates more inflammation, systemic inflammation and brain inflammation in the body. One potential mechanism is that, because there's clear links between inflammation and energy levels. Another mechanism is blood sugar regulation and insulin resistance. If somebody is insulin resistant, and usually that tracks pretty directly with being overweight, that leads to a whole bunch of problems, just poor blood glucose regulations and fluctuations in blood glucose. Plus the really high excess of blood sugar it actually becomes toxic to the cell and to the mitochondria in particular. So there's something called ceramides that can build up and really directly damage the mitochondria in the cells, which are the energy generators. So there's a whole bunch of mechanisms why somebody who is overweight would be fatigued. And then it's kind of, this whole space is kind of complex and almost paradoxical, because you'd think sometimes then losing weight should give you more energy. And it kind of does, but there's more to the story, and because sometimes people crash, and so
right. And I can pick up there, because I've now worked with tens of thousands of people, literally tens of thousands of people, and thousands of them on like a pretty close level. So I've now got, and doing the Bright Line Eating Boot Camp, which we've put 10,000 people through the boot camp and another 10,000 through the 14-day challenge just over the last 2 years. It's given me like a feeling in my bones for how things go, that, before that I'd worked with a few hundred people over like 20 years. Right. And so now the numbers start to add up. And so what it seems like is, a lot of people, when they start to lose weight on my program, feel pretty great. And a lot of people feel really exhausted. And I don't have a sense, note to self, tell Nancy, my director of research, we got to start asking people about their energy levels. We're not actually asking them currently about energy levels. Sorry, writing on a post-it note here. Ask Nancy to start tracking energy levels. Which is really funny because I need to modify my nightly checklist sheet, which is how we have people keep track of their day in Bright Line Eating, to track my own energy levels, because I've got hypothyroidism and I'm starting to wonder like what's working, what's not working. So I need to add that to my nightly checklist sheet too. So anyway, without them tracking, without having clear data, a lot of people report feeling exhausted. So much so, and I knew this would happen when I created my boot camp before I'd put anyone through it. This was 2.5 years ago. One of the earliest modules in videos in module 1 right away is like what to expect in the weight loss phase. And the main thing I talked about is expect to feel exhausted.
Yeah.
So I mentally prepare people like you're not going to feel good right away. Like expect to go, oh, like, wow. And then I go through, the reasons for it. So some people don't go through that and they're braced for it, but it never happens to them and they feel pretty fine. Other people experience it, and then other people experience it and it's even like a little worse than they were braced for. And then they write in and they're like, I really don't feel okay. How long is this gonna last? And, generally what we tell people is like by 90 days, it pretty much lifts this severe exhaustion. And generally speaking, as a matter of fact, I don't think we've ever gotten anyone who's written in saying it didn't lift for me. For me, my Hashimoto's kicked in. So my fatigue personally, when I lost my own weight, because I used to be obese and now I'm slender, my fatigue lasted like 6 months, but that was thyroid related and stuff. So so we see people's energy crash. I mean, that's the short answer of it. Yeah. And then for almost everybody, it lifts again by about 90 days. Some people sooner than that. So I would say between about 2 weeks in and 90 days in, we see people's energy coming up. The energy crash in the first 2-3 days to a week, we call that withdrawal. Like that's for a lot of people, they've got flu-like symptoms, they've got headaches, they're shaking, and they had no idea that sugar and flour were drugs to that effect, but they're actually going through withdrawals. And then the energy crash sets in. So they got the double whammy coming. Yeah.
Well, there's so much in what you just said. I want to go in there and kind of pick it apart piece by piece. And so I guess the first part is, when people sign up for your boot camp and you tell them to brace for this period of fatigue, and then you list out the causes, what are those causes that actually cause the fatigue?
Yeah, sure. So I say, look, a lot of things are going on here. First and I would say maybe 3 main causes. I've never really counted them. Okay, so first and foremost, your fat cells have got to shrink now. Remember, you're not gaining or losing fat cells during the weight loss and weight gain cycle. You just got fat cells and they're getting fatter, they're getting skinnier, they're getting fatter, they're getting skinnier. But meanwhile, they're storing toxins. And that's what these fat cells do, right? They store toxins. They're the storage dumps, the landfills of the body. And so when you lose weight, those fat cells release their fat, but they also release toxins into your bloodstream. So you've now got this steady stream of toxins coming into your bloodstream, and that's exhausting. I also talk about how, you're burning this fat now for part of your fuel, and that might not be the cleanest, most preferred energy source. Your body might not love that so much. And then I talk about how you probably before Bright Line Eating were fueling a lot with caffeine and sugar during moments of fatigue. Like you'd hit a rough patch during the day and you'd go grab a cup of coffee with a bunch of sugar in it and it would get you through. And you probably have been pushing past your normal energy reserves for a long, long time and just using food and caffeine to push. And now you're not going to use caffeine and sugar anymore. And now your body's kind of like, yeah, finally, hello. I've been freaking exhausted for a long time. It's like, now you got nothing to like chemically get over on me. And like, we're going to rest, yo. So I think there's some of that, like your body just finally demands the rest that it needs. And then there's the fact that your body thinks that there's a famine because, you got weight loss setting in. And so your body's like, okay, this is bad. We haven't had enough food to sustain our body weight now for days upon days upon weeks upon weeks. This famine is severe. And it's like, how are we not going to starve to death? And what it decides is that it's going to lower its metabolism low enough that it, can still carry on necessary functions, but maybe not optimally. So it like lowers your thyroid level. And now you've got like some pseudo, hypothyroidism going, and it starts to like subsist on fewer calories essentially. And that makes you tired. Like your metabolism slows down literally because your body thinks it's doing you a favor by saving your life because clearly the food has run out.
Yeah.
So Yeah, for lots of reasons, you're like really tired.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting because the whole metabolism downregulation thing. I guess it's worth pointing out to people that there is actually a center in the brain that is monitoring whether you have enough calories to deal with your normal daily expenditure, and if you don't, then it starts to downregulate things. And we just kind of talk about metabolism because it's easier to talk about things in that way. But there's actually a couple different pieces of that energy expenditure side of the equation that get downregulated. One is the resting metabolic rate, like your metabolism proper. And then the other part of it is actually NEAT, which stands for non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is basically, it has to do with the energy regulation circuits in the brain, like your physical sense of energy, which is it manifests mostly outside of our conscious awareness as our motivation to move, our kind of compulsion to move our body. Right. So whether we're sitting in a chair and kind of like spontaneously fidgeting and we're antsy and you feel that kind of energy in your body, or you just feel like laying down and sitting and you don't want to stand up and walk around and you don't want to fidget and you don't want to get up and go for a walk or go do any exercise. You just want to sit there. And that actually accounts for hundreds of calories every day. And so that there's a huge piece of that puzzle that, eating less food and being in that state, it downregulates your energy level as well as your metabolism, as well as your desire to move. And all of these things are kind of intertwined together.
Yeah, totally. And I know about NEAT because I know you, and I watch it through the day. And it's like, yeah, I do calls a lot. Like I'm on the phone a lot just for my work and stuff. And sometimes I feel like going for a walk and sometimes I feel like being prone on the couch, I watch that desire to move fluctuate for sure.
Yeah. I want to introduce a little bit of context in here that I want to like have you kind of talk about, but I want to present it to the audience because I think it's really important for people to understand this. Mm-hmm. So there's a gap between what is known in the science about weight loss and what is commonly thought within the general public about weight loss.
Bring it, Ari. I love it when you talk about this. Bring it. I love it. Yes, there is. Yeah.
So, one of the things that, and this is not the fault of the general public. This is the result of marketers and people trying to make money who are knowingly misrepresenting the science and are misleading the public for the sake of making money.
Right.
And one of the end results here is that for decades now, there's been all this talk and everybody's wrapped up in this thinking, oh, is it fat that makes us fat? Is it carbs that make us fat? Is it, what's the proper list of good and bad foods? Are lentils good for me or bad for me? Are grains good for me or bad for me? Everybody's telling me different things. Yeah. There's lectins and there's gluten, and what about dairy? And should I go vegan? And should I go, keto? And everybody, and what people don't understand is that for the diet industry, for all of the people who are, the bad people, and there's some good people in the industry for sure. You're obviously one of them, but there's some bad people out there who are fakers, who are charlatans, who are knowingly misrepresenting the science for the sake of just trying to make money off of people.
Yeah.
And basically the end result of this is that we have a general public who's caught up in all of those different details of what's the right diet, what's the best magical diet that will get results, when in fact, in the science community, that among obesity researchers, it's extremely well established at this point, because they've done lots and lots of studies comparing specific diets, that there isn't one magical diet. The key factor is adherence to the diet. It doesn't matter, like if you look at long-term success rates of people on low-carb Atkins diets to, vegan, low-fat Ornish diets to Mediterranean diets to, South Beach diet to lots of other named diets that have been introduced with varying levels of carbs and fats and proteins and animal foods and lots of other differences, polar opposite diets. If you track long-term differences in outcome, there's very, very, very little differences in terms of these long-term weight loss outcomes. The key factor of the people who actually lose weight successfully and sustainably, and it's a very small percentage of people in general with most of those approaches, the key factor is adherence to the diet. So basically, in other words, the people who actually stick to whatever it is that diet's getting you to do are the ones that are successful in the long run. So where your approach differs from basically all the other diets that are out there is all the other diets are trying to come up with the magical macronutrient ratio of carbs to fats and the magical list of good and bad foods that are acceptable or not acceptable based on whatever biochemical and physiological mechanisms. And your approach is fundamentally different because you understand that adherence is the key factor. So everything that you're doing is designed to get people to actually do it and stick to it and have it be sustainable for life. So I want everybody listening to understand that sort of fundamental difference. This is not just, oh, here's another person with another diet that's saying, here's the new list of good and bad foods that you should eat. And this is an extremely well thought out approach that is designed with adherence in mind. And that's the key factor to long-term success. So, I just want to emphasize for everybody listening that is the key distinction, the key difference. This is not just another person out there with, here's my special diet with the new list of good and bad foods. You understand that adherence is the real key to long-term success. And your program is designed with that in mind to facilitate that through specific strategies that are designed to help people actually stick to all of these habits and actually make them habits for life.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Reboot Resume program takes that even to the next level. That's all I think about. I geek out on sustainability, longevity, adherence. I love the way you use the word adherence. The key is what are you actually going to be doing a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? And how does the way you start off, the way you set up your program impact the odds of that longevity, the odds of actually be doing it long term? So for example, let's just take a small thing that, people can debate or whatever, but meal frequency, right? How many times a day should you eat? Well, if you're thinking in terms of longevity and automaticity, fewer meals is better. What are the odds that you're going to succeed brushing and flossing your teeth 6 times a day in and day out, and not miss, and have your toothpaste and your floss on you at the right times, and stop what you're doing to go floss your teeth? The odds of getting that right are really slim. To succeed long term, you need to be eating with the type of automaticity that is in play when you're brushing your teeth, right? Morning and night, there are these time of day cues and these location cues that cue you into the right behavioral pattern. That's how you need to get your food. It's not about making the right choices. You won't succeed if you're making choices. You can't, I think the research is we make 200 food-related choices a day. Odds are we're grumpy and depleted during some of those choice moments. You need to avoid that situation where you're F it, let's order a pizza, right? I can't even think about dinner right now. Takeout, please. It's Friday night. I deserve it, right? So, when you start to think about implementation over the long term, you start to ask the question differently. It's not what's, what digestive system and what did our ancestors do and how many, it's not about that. It's what's actually going to set me up to be able to execute long term in the face of stress, in the real world, right? So this is where you and I, at the beginning, we kind of went toe to toe because you were well, the studies show this. And I'm Ari, the studies haven't been done. I'm talking 5 years later. Who's getting someone thin and keeping them there? Those studies haven't been done. Yeah. And what I'm telling you is my system, give me 5 years with somebody, and not all of them, but I'll have a chunk of them, the ones that were really willing and really ready, I will have them in right-sized bodies 5 years from now. And those are the factors that aren't being studied. So
yeah, and I will say that I was skeptical of all that at first, but now having, like I said, I have probably 1,000 or so members in my Energy Blueprint program who have been through Bright Line Eating, and I've seen it firsthand. So I just have to kind of shut up and accept that it's true at this point, and embrace it. Embrace that I've learned something really valuable from you in terms of realizing that the methods that you're teaching really are key factors for long-term success. So
wait, before you ask another question, I got something I want to share. So I haven't shared this with you yet. I've been in this like mode of like synthesizing all this sort of implicit data collection that I just did, right? And I just came up with an acronym for what I'm calling the essentials of long-term sustainable weight loss. Like if you really boil it down to its key elements, and you'll love this because this is what everybody's doing who's living in a right-sized body, who's living lean. All of them, whether they get it for free because their system naturally rolls that way, they got a fast metabolism, they got good genes, and they love to hit the gym and eat their kale, or people like me who fight for it the hard way and like, scratch and claw their way down to lean and figure out how to stay there. This is what we're all doing. It's three things. The essentials are as fundamental as air, as breathing air. AIR. And it's automaticity, identity, and resume. So the automaticity is like, you have to be thinking about habits that become non-conscious. It's not about making good choices. It's about having good behavioral habits wired in, right? So, and you set that up in a way that works for your life, right? Like, some people are late morning eaters. Some people like to eat breakfast at 6 a.m., like whatever. You have to wire in your automatic habits and have a baseline sort of behavioral pattern that rolls through your system automatically, like brushing your teeth. So automaticity, and then identity. Like you have to be a person who lives healthy, a person who doesn't eat that stuff, a person who thinks, I'm not joining you for, McDonald's because I don't eat at McDonald's, right? I'm not like rocking up to an amusement park all day with no thoughts of what I'm going to eat because like they serve crap there and I don't eat crap, right? So a person whose identity is such that you're not thinking, I can't have that because it's not on my diet. No, you would never say that. Or, I think I'll have a cheat day on Sunday. You would never say that. Like you're not someone who eats, crap normally, is dieting right now and now having a cheat day. Like that's the wrong identity frame, right? Like you're someone who fuels their body with whole, real, healthy, awesome food, right? That's who you are. It changes your languaging. It changes how you think about yourself. And then the resume is like, and just so you know, we spell it REZOOM. Like a little nod to the speed, right? Zoom, like zoom right back, resume. Someone in my tribe came up with that a few years ago. I thought it was really cute. So I think that's going to be my third book is Resume, REZOOM.
Nice.
Coming in 2021, probably. All right. Anyway, the resume is like people who are healthy naturally, their systems want the resume. Like their systems cry out for the resume. Like they run on moderation, they deviate too far, and they're like, that kind of felt off, a little extreme. Like, we got to get back to our home base, our like baseline, like where we run naturally. Those of us who don't get it for free, we wander off path and we'll keep going if we don't have things like bright lines or things like a community or whatever to pull us back to the center. But you got to expect the lapse. You got to expect it and be ready to like have a way to pull yourself back because, perfection is not available. This is planet Earth with human beings. Like, we don't need to be perfect, but we need to be unstoppable and we need to have that resume. So automaticity, identity, and resume, AIR, that's the framework. Like that's what actually constitutes living happy, thin, and free long-term.
Yeah, I love that. So you just made a piece of research that I looked at probably 4 or 5 years ago pop into my head. I don't know if this is something that I've talked to you about before, maybe a few years ago, but there's research around something called the healthy obsession. And it's research that I've always really been a fan of. I always thought it was very insightful in terms of, one of the things that they found is that people who are successful long-term have a certain kind of personality or certain kinds of personality traits, I should say. And one of the things that happens, I won't go into all the details of this, but they develop a sort of healthy obsession with, and we have a negative stigma around that word obsession, but in this case, it's a very positive thing. It's that the people who are successful long-term, improving their health, losing the weight, keeping it off for many, many years, become in a healthy way, obsessed with healthy habits. They become uncompromising in their devotion to eating well, to having healthy lifestyle habits. Yeah. And there was one little facet of this research that I think is really interesting and related to what you're talking about, also counterintuitive, which is that the people who are successful long-term have a stronger negative reaction to deviating from their normal healthy habits. So they have a stronger negative emotional reaction. Now that kind of sounds like a bad thing, right? But basically it's the same thing that you're talking about. It's that people who are committed to achieving their goal react to deviations, react to coming off the plan with a sort of immediate negative emotional reaction, where they recognize the fact that they deviated, and then they catalyze that negative emotional reaction into getting back on the plan. Whereas the people who are not as successful, they either don't have such a strong negative emotional reaction. They kind of just go, oh, well, whatever, screw it, Right. And they're sort of more laissez-faire about the whole thing, or it doesn't actually become a catalyst for resuming positive change. It just becomes something where they're now beating themselves up and berating themselves for deviating, but without any sort of productive strategic thinking around what the solution is. So I'm just curious. I just wanted to introduce that and see what your thoughts are on that.
I love it. And I'd love to see the data, because here's what I would predict, Ari. In psychology, there's all these different graphs in different domains that kind of do the same thing, where it's like, okay, down here, this is like not enough activation energy, that then in this mid-range is the right amount, and up here is too much, right? That sort of general framework applies to so many things, right? But like you can think of sort of the productive zone of discomfort and then the unproductive zone of panic, right? And so what I would predict is that some of my people experience too much negative reaction from a deviation, and it becomes unproductive, right? So some of the reboot resume framework is like, how do you expect that you're gonna relapse, expect the falling off track in some way, even if it doesn't go all the way to your food. Like, it's not that you ate a cookie, but it's that, okay, I didn't write down my food for a few days, and I'm not meditating anymore, and I haven't, whatever your habits are that keep you on track. The lapse or the relapse always happens at some point. Life shows up and you just feel a little off track, guaranteed. The key is like to expect that your food journey is going to show up in sine waves, with periods of time where you're on your game and you're on a peak, and then periods of time where you're lapsing or relapsing and falling off your game. And how do you put in adaptive responses as you're on the way down to language it in a way where it's no big deal, really? Like, it's a thing, but it's not too big of a thing, right? And it's like, okay, honey, well, here we are in the lapse phase, and we know how to resume. We know what to do to get back on track, and like getting it back up there so that it's not, what happens for some of us who have a really strong reaction, because if we've gained back all our weight, like, I got people in my tribe who've gained and lost 100 pounds 5 times in their life, right? That starts to get terrifying. Like, really scary. Like, oh no, I just picked up some food that's off my plan. Am I about to shoot up? Like, at my worst, I gained from a size 4 to a size 24 in 3 months.
Wow.
That's obscene. Like that, like watching yourself do that, Google what a size 4 and a size 24 looks like. That's off the hook, from like petite, tiny, slender to morbidly obese in 3 months. And basically sitting in a closet and eating for 3 months. Okay, so if you've watched yourself do that, being off track could be like noticing you just ate a cookie and you're a bright line eater, you don't eat cookies. Like, that could be really scary. So what happens when the system, your body, is freaked out is a massive sympathetic nervous system response, fight or flight, which narrows your focus. It floods your body with hormones that signal like, you're breathing heavy, you feel like you gotta, get out of Dodge, or you're frozen or whatever. And all of a sudden it becomes really hard to do some basic things that would help you get back on track, right? in particular, like if we access the anxiety literature, what differentiates people who experience anxiety, like fear over airplane travel, for example, and people who don't, is a feeling of perceived control. Like I step onto an airplane and I feel in control. I got my little area. I'm going to do my work. I've got my computer, my laptop, my journal. I'm going to watch a movie. I'm going to take a nap. Like I feel completely in control. Someone who's afraid of airplane travel, they're thinking, I'm in a steel box 30,000 feet up in the air and I could plummet to the earth at any time and I got no say in that. I'm completely out of control this whole time.
Going
right?
500 miles per hour.
Totally. So if you've picked up the bite or you're off track, like having a framing where you're in control of that process. You expected it and you know exactly what to do now. Like we know how to write the train, right? So I love how you said those people who are successful living, I call it happy, thin, and free, whatever. It's my tagline, right? Those people who are successful at that, it's a thing when they fall off track. It ain't no thing. It's a thing.
Yeah.
And they use that as activation energy to get back on track. Yeah. So it's a two-part thing, right? It's got to be both. And I would add a third thing. It can't be too much of a thing.
Right.
That's not helpful either. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Too much of a thing that you just are depressed and you hate yourself and you hate your life. And
you're in the shame spiral, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Now what happens is it pulls you away from support. Now you're like, okay, I'm a piece of shit and I'm not fit for human, company. And I got to like go hide till I get this figured out on my own. Like that's not the helpful response.
Yeah. So I want to mention one quick thing in case it's not obvious to people listening. These principles don't just apply to weight loss. These principles equally apply to, for example, people going through my program trying to recover their energy levels.
Yep.
It's the same principles. You're hyped up. You're super excited. You just got this new program. You go into it full force. I mean, as with any program, we know the stats. The same thing with reading books, buying any program, starting a meditation practice, anything.
Yep.
You're super excited about it, and then you do it maybe like religiously and consistently for a few days, a few weeks, maybe a few months, and then we naturally start to fall off. Whatever it is, whatever the habit or the practice is, or the program or the book, whatever it is, that same principle applies. So what you're talking about is sort of identifying the key elements of how do you get back on track.
Yeah. Yeah. And really it's like you take this like restart sort of crash and burn merry-go-round cycle and you just smooth off the edges and then you raise the whole thing up so that the sine wave there has some cushion between your low points and what I call like the danger and destruction zone, that zone where you're really engaging in some profoundly unhealthy behaviors, right? You just create cushion there. And in my experience, some of the most potent things for creating that cushion are social support. Like we're herd animals and we will engage in behaviors that are normalized by our tribe. And we will not continuously engage in behaviors that everyone around us is saying are weird or aberrant. So you got to be really careful who you run with. And a lot of us have family and colleagues at work whose health behaviors we have no control over, right? So what that means is you're going to have to self-select a community and make it robust enough, like develop actual real connections that are meaningful to you in that community to normalize the healthy habits that you want to emulate. Because the reality is that society out there right now is profoundly unhealthy. If you roll with the normal, you're going to be fat, sick, miserable with no energy and dying, 15, 20 years too young with a lot of joint pain. Like that's just the way it's going to be, right? So you have to surround yourself by choice, by design, with people who feed back that your behaviors, which are swimming upstream from society, are normal and appropriate. And the people giving you flack about it out there, well, they're off their rocker because like, look at them. Like, you want to be different from that,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up. I talk about this same principle in slightly different words, but one of the things I tell people is, hey, look, everybody has this desire to sort of be normal, to not do behaviors that are weird, that are perceived to be extreme, that are perceived to be radically different from whatever the norm is. And that's fine. And that's programmed into us by evolution. Here's the problem. In the modern Western world, the majority of people, what is normal as a result of the way pretty much everybody is living, they are destined to become overweight or obese. They are destined to get some kind of chronic disease, which is a disease of lifestyle, things like heart disease, most cancers, most neurological disease, many of these other things that are becoming massive epidemics in the last few decades. These are becoming normal. So what you have to understand is that if you let that desire to be normal and to be like everybody else run you, you too will be destined for those things. So if you don't want to be destined for those things, if you want to be lean, energetic, and live a long time free of debilitating symptoms and disease, you have to make a conscious decision to be a little bit weird, and I use that word as like weird as perceived by most regular people. You have to be different. You have to be quote unquote extreme in your commitment to being healthy.
Yeah. And I would say you got to surround yourself with 5 or 6 people that you're actually in touch with on a regular basis who are weird like you.
Yeah.
Because no one who's a human being with a beating heart and sensitive to the social cues of the world, which is all of us, no one can run that different sustainably long term. We just can't. We have to surround ourselves with people who mirror back that we belong and that we're okay. And yes, you gotta develop a tribe. So that creates some of the cushion. I think the rest of the cushion is created by, there's some positive psychology things that are really helpful, like meditation. Boy, it just, especially around food behaviors, because eating is one of these things that happens with a certain frequency, right? That you're going to need to be engaging in eating behaviors when you're triggered, when you're emotional, when you're fighting with your partner, when your kids are crawling at you and you're going out of your mind. Like, you have to build in that pause, that sense of not jumping to reaction mode, being able to respond rather than react. And meditation it's the best way to sort of be able to respond to the world with poise and equanimity, even when it's feeling a little crazy. So meditation's super helpful. Gratitude is super helpful. I know these sound like so mamby-pamby, right? Like just such like woo-woo, whatever, but they freaking work. They really do. Yeah. They really do. And then it's the actions. Like in Bright Line Eating, we're so into how the actions turn into habits, turn into automatic habits that then you get for free. So they're not taxing your cognitive resources, and it becomes like brushing your teeth, like stuff you execute every day without the sticky note on your mirror to remind you, right? Yeah. You don't wake up every day saying, I'm going to brush my teeth twice today. I got this. I'm not going to fail. Like, I'm on a roll now. I've been doing it for a month. I got to keep going, right? You have to think about that with brushing your teeth. You got to get your food, your eating wired in like that. And that's why I tell people in Bright Line Eating, Ari, you're so right. I don't care if you're keto. I don't care if you're a whole food plant-based. I don't care if you think that, you need more fat or less fat or a different kind of protein, like whatever. As long as you're eating a ton of vegetables and you're not eating sugar and flour, which is code word for like all processed crap, right? The body's going to forgive you on the details. Eat your vegetables. Don't eat the sugar and flour. I don't care what you do with the rest, but do it the Bright Line way. Like, automaticity, identity, resume. We're going to get you doing this for years and years and years and years, right? Again, it's just like you said, it's not about the magic macronutrient combination. We need to get your head out of that. That doesn't matter. Yeah. It doesn't matter.